Hello. It is September 4th, 2024, Wednesday, otherwise known as Mercury Day. So it's a good day for communications. With that said, I had no intentions of doing this video today, but given some news, Mercury, that I saw today, this morning in particular, I felt called to come on here and have a pretty direct conversation. With that said, I'm just going to warn you what I'm about to talk about is not light. It is heavy. And it is going to very much center around abuse and sexual abuse from institutions specifically like the Catholic Church. So I just want to give you that heads up. If that is not something you're open to listening to or about, I highly recommend you turn this video off. My purpose in giving this video is to provide some perspective about what the time is asking of us now, what these planets are doing in the formations that they are in, and asking of us to look at and tell the truth about. That's a part of it. The other part of it is to give and to be a model and to give full permission to those who have also experienced abuse or trauma or have ancestral trauma or that are struggling with addiction to have full permission to tell your own truth, tell your story, and understand that you are worthy of the healing that is surrounding that abuse. You are worthy of using your voice to share your story. You are worthy of acknowledgement that something was wrong done to you. You are worthy of someone taking responsibility and accountability for that trauma, that harm that may have been done to you, particularly if you were a child. So, I'm going to back up a little now. I'm going to be sharing a poem at the end if you're open to staying on that long, about one that I wrote about related to my own story. But I am going to just talk about just what's come up and has been coming up. So, just to reflect on Pluto quickly. Pluto is the planet of death, rebirth, transformation. It is interested in taking the truth that is buried below the ground and bringing it up to the surface. Wherever Pluto is in the zodiac, it is doing it within that zodiac sign's topics. So it has been in Capricorn since 2008. As I've said in multiple videos, if you go to my YouTube channel, I talk a lot about Pluto in Capricorn and what it's been doing since 2008. But essentially, it has been decimating all of these institutional structures and corporate structures that are harming us in multiple ways, whether that's harming our economy, harming humans, harming our ability to thrive. So this could be governments, this could be industries. So just think about since 2008, I'm only going to speak from the US perspective in this moment, but we have had lots of, let's call it restructuring and bailouts for banks, auto industries. We've had the tech, bubble blow. We've had the home housing crises. We've had many crises within our educational systems, higher educational systems, and mostly included. We have seen our airlines and our car industries needing to be bailed out. These are major institutional structures that have existed and have some influence over the way our society runs. That is Capricorn. So Pluto has been going through since 2008, and you can just look, like literally, 2008, what happened? The banks, the housing crisis, it's very clear that it's been showing us all the holes, showing us what's really going on, beneath the surface of these things, which we can generally boil it down to greed and power and money. So the Catholic Church is one of those institutions, so I just want to mention that. Particularly in Ireland, where I have spent a lot of time in the last year and have in previous years, and all of my ancestry is from, and I'll go into that a little bit shortly, but the Catholic Church and its entanglement with governments has been being called out on the carpet over the last 20 years in particular because of the problems and a major, levels of abuse, particularly sexual abuse, and in slavery, that have happened under their ruling. As essentially for nearly a century or half a century, between half a century and a century, has been governing Ireland. So why am I bringing this all up? So in Pluto, we're in it, it's been in Capricorn last year. It was in the 29th degree. So in every zodiac sign, we go from 0 through 29 degrees. It's 30 degrees per zodiac sign that a planet is going to move through or transit through. When it gets to the end of a sign, we are really it's like anything that's left is going to come up, So especially in Pluto's case, it is bringing the truth up. And it is, I'll just read this. Pluto's the planet of transformation, regeneration, power, and spends anywhere from 12 to 32 years in each sign. With Pluto in Capricorn, there will be extreme changes in government, institutions, and one's attitude to long-held traditions and rules of society, business, and personal goals. There could be an increase in ambition on a personal level and a resounding ability to persevere through the most difficult of obstacles. This is the time to become the ultimate authority of one's personal power. As I've shared, I am a Capricorn rising. So Pluto has been going through partly my 12th house and into my first house of identity while it's been in Capricorn. And now that it's finishing up in Capricorn, I can only tell you the amount of personal power I have gathered up, particularly in this last 2 years, particularly in the last year, around speaking my truth and not shying away because of the things that I experienced, also through the pandemic as a business owner and as an Eastern medical practitioner, and all kinds of things like that have just started bringing this out, because of my particular view. And I'm not going to go into my biography and my resume and all the places that I've worked, whether it be Goldman Sachs or in private practice. What I can tell you is that I've been working with people personally and particularly in a healing context for nearly 25 years. And a big part of what I have attracted in are clients and patients that are struggling with trauma, ancestral trauma, and addiction. And what I can say about all three of those things is that generally boils down to abuse, that has caused those things. And abuse of, our authoritative figure, from authoritative figures, whether that's relatives and parents, that's one aspect, or in institutions. And in this case, I would like to talk about that because of the waterfall of problems it has caused within societies and families, and has the amount of what I would call ancestral and intergenerational trauma that has been caused by these institutions. And like I said, I am specifically calling out the Catholic Church here. As someone who was raised Catholic, I left the church a long time ago when I had learned more and more about what it was going on behind the closed doors and the lack of responsibility and accountability that has been held for that institution as it relates to this. It's been decades we've been listening to the amount of abuse, and yet there has been, outside of the lawsuits and the money that's being handed over, there has been very little acknowledgement coming from the church about their responsibility in this, which is very ironic as an institution that is here to tout morals and values in families and in life and in society. So, what I want to say is we are in the 29th degree. Pluto has retrograded back, and when it's retrograding back to this 29th degree, it'll be turning around again in the middle of October, and by middle of November, specifically November 19th, it is going to enter Aquarius, and it is going to start working on a whole different level of things when it gets to Aquarius. So, what's going to be going on likely in these remaining weeks of Pluto retrograding back is it's saying, I am here to make sure that anything that has not been dealt with gets dealt with. So I'm going to warn you that this is not going to be an easy couple months ahead of us. We are going to be challenged in many ways, and not just in the U.S. where we're going through an election, but we've got wars going on around the planet. We've got people fighting from their religious standpoints. We have people in these countries fighting about things in other countries. There's so much. And what I want to talk about is that a lot of that, I believe, comes down to ancestral trauma. Ancestral trauma is the trauma that is passed down from our ancestors to us. We believe, and we've only generally talked about, because our institutions, including our education systems, are also very much controlled as far as what is talked about or discussed, But and especially in medical institutions and medical schools, the education is very much formulated not for, I'll just say it's very limited. Our medical schools and their training are incredibly limited on their real awareness of the human body and its abilities at multiple levels and realms. But we generally only talk about passing genes and genetic information from one generation down to the next. That is not all that gets passed down. Trauma gets passed down because most of that trauma is unresolved, particularly for the generations before, where there wasn't even, trauma wasn't even a word people talked about. It wasn't until, World War II and Vietnam that we even started talking about things like PTSD. But it was always seen, the context, that any of these topics have been held within have just repeatedly triggered and re-abused people who have been abused or have experienced extreme forms of trauma. They just become re-traumatized, every time that they are denied or are, held within a context of not mentally stable or this or that. Whatever way that we are diminishing someone's experience because we don't want them to speak up, that's oppression. And we've been doing that for a very, very long time. And I am not going to have it anymore. I mean, that's just where I'm at. So that is what Pluto has done for me with it transiting through my Capricorn, first house. And even in my 12th house, bringing a lot of things out of my subconscious and unconscious from my own lineage that I am literally just discovering in live time right now. And now it makes so much more sense to me why I've been plagued by the issues that I've had. And this has not been easy to talk about because this is not a topic that is generally discussed. And in many, depending on who you're speaking to, particularly if you're speaking to scientists or researchers or Western medical practitioners, they won't acknowledge a lot of this stuff because they can't quantify it in particular ways. And so it's not real in those paradigms. But what I can tell you is that having spent this last 20-something years working with people, what I am pretty sure of is that we can boil down a lot of these issues to abuse. And I would like to focus on what the Catholic Church has done. And I would like to bring up the fact that it has taken very little responsibility, has really not acknowledged anything, and they continue to gaslight people. I mean, the things that I was just reading, I'm honestly flabbergasted by. So why did this all come up for me? So, as I said, I was aware of what's been going on with Pluto, but just yesterday, a report came out from Ireland. Now, Ireland is someplace I'm focused on. As I said, this is where my ancestral roots are. My mother was actually born into a Magdalene laundry, which I'll get to in a bit, and the abuse that went on there. But what I want to talk about is this report that just came out, which is citing 2,395 allegations of child sexual abuse involving 884 alleged abusers in 308 schools across the country. These weren't just any schools, these were schools that were run by the church. 90% of the schools in Ireland are run by the Catholic Church. So just to give you some context of how people in Ireland have been educated, they've been educated by an oppressive institution. So, with that said, the words that were used, truly shocking, and so is the number of alleged abusers. The report has a harrowing document containing some of the most appalling accounts of sexual abuse. More than 140 survivors provided harrowing testimony for the report, describing being molested, stripped naked, raped, and drugged in an atmosphere of terror and silence. Their abuse was often accompanied by ferocious violence, the 700-page report said. Most of these that were interviewed were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and have, said that this abuse has plagued them their entire life. What I know about people who deal with this, it affects their interpersonal relationships, their family relationships, it affects their ability to thrive, it affects their ability to stand up for themselves, it affects their ability to conduct life in a normal way. It is why they turn to substances. It is why they look for any way to escape their reality, because no one has acknowledged the reality of their world and what they have undergone and experienced. And the Catholic Church has done a fantastic job of denying their responsibility in all of this, which just makes it worse. Just makes it worse. I can give the government of Ireland some credit for at least, putting redress schemes together for the people who have suffered at the hands of these particular circumstances. But to have no accountability other than being deeply sorry is not acceptable. As far as I am concerned, we've been looking at what this church has done for more than 20 years, like in writing, in testimony, from real survivors of real abuse. And let's be honest, half of the people that have suffered are now dead. They are now dead, and now their children, the next generation, is dealing with it, because we don't just pass down genes, we pass down the trauma. And so it is this new generation that is not going to allow for this anymore. It is very obvious how little power the church now has over the newer and younger generations, because they won't withstand this anymore. And it's unfortunate that the most of the older generations that remain, because they don't know any different, or they don't want to believe that where they've put their faith could actually be this disgusting. This disgusting. The question for all of us is, look, I understand when we have experienced trauma ourselves, it is difficult to stand up. It is difficult to stand up. It is also difficult for all of the Irish. It was difficult and continues to probably be difficult for all of the Irish to speak up about this, because the church was running the country, essentially. They instilled the fear in people. There was no form of birth control. There were no abortions. If you were a married couple, you couldn't even hold hands in public. So if a woman got pregnant in Ireland, because there were no means, to prevent that, being a normal human being with hormones and urges as any other human being would be, that they had no solutions. And when they got pregnant, they were sent to these homes they called the Magdalene Laundries. And this is part of my history, and something that I've been dealing with personally, because unfortunately my grandmother as well as my mother have not been able to fully process and heal from the experience. And so it passed right down to me as the firstborn daughter. And I've been struggling with it for years because I didn't understand it. And it took until finding a healer and someone that specialized in this, introducing the idea of ancestral trauma to me maybe 10, 12 years ago now, before I really started to understand what was going on with me and where this anger came from and why I had such resistance to such things and continue to have such resistance to such things. Why I am rebellious. So, my purpose is to give you permission to be the same. I did not speak very much as a child. There's lots of reasons for that, specifically related to the Magdalene Laundries. When you were put into one of these Magdalene Laundries, you were not allowed to speak. The Magdalene Laundries were institutions, so if you became pregnant and you were not married, if you were a woman who was considered promiscuous by someone else's definition, you were sent to these homes, a lot of the times by your own family. Or you were sent there because your family couldn't take care of you, or the amount of shame that the family felt because of this experience, because, again, of the oppressive nature of the church. And so these women were sent to these institutions to have their babies, and the story is generally told like they were given up for adoption. That is not the case in a lot of these stories. It became apparent when mass graves of bodies started coming up from the ground. So if you want to talk about Pluto, quite literally bringing the truth from the underground up to the surface, that is what broke open the investigations in Ireland. Not just women's bodies, babies' bodies. Massive graves of babies' bodies. Septic tanks full of babies' bodies were found in these investigations. You can look it up. This is all now public information. But it was hidden. And there's many more things that have remained and continue to remain hidden. In the case of where my mother was born, there are 859 babies still missing on the property of Bessborough. Bessborough is the name of the mother baby home in Cork, Ireland. The church has been actively trying to sell off the massive property to different institutions and different peoples to probably, as quickly as possible, hide what literally is buried below the surface of that property. So I have made it my mission to bring dignity to those 859 children that we can't even, we can't even honor. So I'm bringing this up because then yesterday this new report comes of what's just going on in the schools, and then I started thinking about where are we at? Where are the numbers at with the amount of abuse? So in 2021, it was estimated that there was over 30,000 people in the United States between 1922 and 1996 that had experienced sexual abuse in the United States. There's 9,000 babies and children that died in those 18 homes run by the Catholic Church. In France alone, there was 216,000 minors that have reported allegations of sexual abuse. These are 3 countries, U.S., Ireland, and France. Where's the Catholic Church? It's everywhere. So it has been very difficult to come up with accurate numbers because of the fact that so many people have already died and have never been able to tell their story. So I am on here because I am wondering what it is going to take for us to just start telling the truth and help each other tell the truth. Why are we still defending these abusive groups? Why do we still stand behind public parties that have a history of horrific support for horrific behavior by fellow institutional governments, or institutions that the government works with and has been entangled with? What will it take? Pluto is here to bring it up, and it is going to be intense. And I am not going to be a person who's going to pretend that these things didn't happen anymore. I'm not going to be a person who's not going to speak up for fear it's going to offend those people in my life that are still in the clergy, that still support the clergy, that still support the church. You can do whatever you want, but I'm not going to make you feel comfortable about it if you're going to talk to me about it. If this was a private company, this thing would have been destroyed decades ago. Destroyed. So how has the church been able to get away with this level of history actively? And there still continues to be abuse. There's been how many of these priests have been incarcerated? How many children have been abused and never spoken up? Because that is more likely the case than the case that they would have spoken up. When you are traumatized to not speak up as a child, it is very difficult to get to the point where you are comfortable. It takes decades, which is why these people are coming forth in their 50s and 60s and 70s. So what is it going to take? What is it going to take to stop supporting institutions like this? And the Catholic Church is not the only one. So that is my message for today. I know it's not a light one, and I could go into more details, and I don't really want to, but I am going to read the poem that I wrote as it relates to the Magdalene Laundries. It's called The Magdalene Laundries, for my mother and grandmother. I gave it over 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears, attempting to release fears of what now appears. But there are no regrets or feelings of failed bets. It was all a part of the way I'd return to myself one day, and to the green land where it all began, the trauma and misuse of Catholic power and abuse, to reclaim my bloodline for my mother and me, and for my grandmother who never got to see. Acknowledgement and justice for every woman and child that was locked up and neglected, shamed, beat, and in denial of their birthright to even exist, and birth certificates hidden amidst convents that became run by mother slaves, babies buried in septic tanks in mass unmarked graves. So it is up to me to heal and reclaim and tell our family story and set aflame to all the lies where women were blamed for not being obedient and properly tamed. So now it's been 20 years that have passed since I looked that nun in the eye and asked, how could you pretend to be so holy while blaming women, children, and babies solely? While the land there may be full of beauty, below the surface lies a line of duty to honor all the many lives that were lost and children trafficked over oceans they crossed. So many still living traumatized and addicted to alcohol, drugs, and even convicted. Because they don't know the story of their birth and how the Catholic Church stole and took all of their self-worth. I will not be quiet about this any longer. I will not make anyone feel more comfortable about this any longer. I am here for babies. I am here for children. I am here for healing. And that requires acknowledgement. And it's not about being deeply sorry. It's about taking accountability and realizing that more harm has been done under their leadership than any kind of faith and support. It is time. Thank you for listening.